This is Story Recapped. Today, I'm going to explain a drama, romance, sci-fi film called Young Ones. Spoilers ahead. Watch out and take care. Jerome Holm was born during the terrible drought, so he never saw their land when it was green. His father, Ernest, never stops talking about the wheat that they used to grow there and the pride they felt after the harvest. After the states and towns broke apart due to fights over water, many people decided to leave. Ernest, however, stayed behind because he believed that the land would once again be fertile. One day, two men try to break into Ernest's well to steal water. Ernest catches them and fires 2 warning shots. One of the thieves pulls out a gun, so Ernest kills him. Ernest asks the other thief to turn around, but he refuses, thinking that Ernest won't shoot him in the back. As Ernest interrogates him, the man suddenly turns around and fires a gun at him. Ernest rapidly fires back and kills the man. When Jerome asks if he's hit, Ernest checks himself, but he doesn't see any wounds. Ernest and Jerome inspect the well and discover that the well has run out of water. Ernest makes a living by delivering supplies to workers who extract water from a deep well. When Ernest and Jerome bring alcohol to the site, a waterman named Caleb tells Ernest that he'll make a lot of money selling the supplies at the border. However, Ernest is not interested in shady transactions. He asks Caleb if their community would benefit from the water that they're extracting, but Caleb notes that it's only meant for commercial farms. On their way home, their donkey trips and breaks its legs, so Ernest has to kill it. Jerome then apologizes because he couldn't kill the donkey himself. That night, Ernest tells Jerome's sister Mary that they'll visit their mother, Catherine, at the nursing home the next day after going to an auction. Mary asks Ernest if he brought the fabric that she asked for, but Ernest didn't because he had nothing to trade. Mary tells Ernest that she won't be going with them to visit Catherine. Hours later, Mary sneaks out of the house to be with her boyfriend. Jerome attempts to close her window, but Ernest tells him to leave it open so that she can return. The next day, Ernest and Jerome go to Sam Lever's auction house to bid on a cargo-carrying robot called Simulate Shadow to replace their donkey. When the bidding starts, Ernest competes with another man for the robot. Sam's son, Fleming, also tries to bid on the robot, but Sam ignores him. When Ernest gets the robot, Fleming congratulates him, noting that the machine will allow Ernest to keep delivering the supplies to the watermen. Later, Ernest tells Jerome that he just acquired more debt for buying the robot. Afterward, Ernest and Jerome stop by the nursing home to see Catherine, a double amputee. Catherine can only walk with her artificial legs as long as she's connected to wire braces in the nursing home. Ernest and Jerome spend a few hours with her, and before they leave, Ernest helps a nurse put Catherine in her wheelchair and kisses her goodbye. When Ernest and Jerome stop by a water station, they come across Robbie and his wife, Suze. Ernest expresses his dismay because Robbie is using their baby to gain sympathy as they beg for water. After filling up his tank with water, Ernest takes pity on Robbie and gives him a container full of water. Suze suggests that Ernest could adopt her and the baby, but he notes that he can't feed them. Suze then discloses that Robbie is thinking of selling their baby. Before leaving the water station, Ernest tells Robbie to take the baby to the doctor and promises to pay the fees. He admonishes Robbie against selling the baby and tells him to visit him if he needs water. Later, Fleming stops by the house to borrow Ernest's robot. Ernest notes that Fleming could take it whenever it's not in use if he asks his father for a guarantee. Fleming offers to take over his route, but Ernest advises him to apply for the job officially. When Ernest asks Fleming to leave, Fleming gets infuriated and asks him if his kids know what he did to his wife when he was a drunkard. When Ernest delivers supplies to Caleb, he tries to make an offer to convince Caleb to reroute the water to his land. However, Caleb is no longer interested in making a deal with him. Since Ernest's well has run dry, he decides to dig it up and turn it into a deer trap. While working on the trap, Ernest tells Jerome that he met a girl when he crossed the border. He thinks Jerome might like her, though she's a little older than him. Ernest points out that Jerome doesn't have to marry her. He advises him to stop waiting for something that may never come. He contends that waiting is a disease and Jerome should take action when he thinks of doing something. When Jerome asks him to describe the girl, Ernest recounts that her ears poke through her hair. On their way home, Ernest and Jerome see Fleming on a motorcycle heading in the opposite direction. Later, Ernest tells Mary that he doesn't want her to see Fleming anymore, but she hints that she could just leave the house one day to be with him. Mary asserts that Ernest is punishing her for being happy, but he contends that he's just protecting her. Mary then warns Ernest that he's just making her hate him by asking her to stay away from Fleming. Later, Mary approaches Jerome sobbing uncontrollably and tells him that she needs money because she's leaving. Jerome hands Mary the money Ernest gave him, but Ernest prevents her from leaving. Then, Ernest grabs a hammer and nails Mary's window shut to prevent her from escaping. The next day, Ernest and Jerome discover that the robot has been stolen. Ernest stops by Sam's house to find Fleming, but he's not there. Sam claims that Fleming went to the mountain earlier and told him that he was there to drop supplies off for the watermen. Later on, Ernest goes to the mountain to see if his robot is there. As he looks around, Caleb sneaks up on him and knocks him unconscious. When Ernest wakes up that night, Caleb accuses him of stealing the supplies and selling them on the black market. Ernest argues that he didn't steal anything, but Caleb refuses to believe him. Caleb attempts to stab him, but Ernest manages to knock the knife away from his hand. As the scuffle continues, Ernest manages to grab a shotgun, Ernest leaves the site after taking Caleb's knife. Not long after, Ernest tracks down the robot with Fleming while he's asleep. In the morning, Ernest wakes him up while pointing his shotgun at him. Then, Ernest ties him up and tells him that he's taking him to Caleb to let him know who really stole the supplies. Fleming contends that the waterman paid him to steal the supplies because they're covered by insurance. Later on, Fleming asks for something to drink, but Ernest points out that there's no water in the supplies. Fleming convinces him to get a drink of alcohol because they don't have anything else. Ernest decides to untie Fleming and let him get the bottles. While the two men drink, Fleming recognizes Caleb's knife when Ernest sticks it into the ground. Ernest reveals that he took it from Caleb when they fought. Fleming apologizes for stealing his robot, but he expresses his outrage that the state took his father's land and gave it to Ernest. Fleming then notes that he's leaving with the money that the watermen paid him. He warns Ernest that those same watermen might hurt him if he returns what Fleming stole. Fleming tries to bribe Ernest with his earnings, but Ernest declines. When Ernest tells him to get ready to move, Fleming realizes that Ernest is too drunk to get up. Fleming throws a rock at Ernest and hits him on the head. Due to the impact, his head slams into the rock behind him. Ernest fires his shotgun as he starts to fall unconscious. When Ernest wakes up, Fleming pours more alcohol into his mouth. Later, Fleming stops by Ernest's house to take Mary out on a joyride. Jerome decides to look for Ernest as soon as Mary and Fleming leave. That night, he finds the robot by the deep well when he asks the waterman about his father. Caleb informs him that his father got into an accident with the robot. Jerome and Mary hold a funeral for Ernest the next day. Afterward, they visit their mother to show them footage of the funeral. As they're about to leave the nursing home, they find Fleming waiting inside his truck to take them home. Later that day, Jerome tries to smash the robot with a sledgehammer out of anger. Fleming tells him that it's natural for him to grieve, but he cautions against turning it into blame because it's a lazy person's way of understanding the chaos in the world. Fleming then asks Jerome to let him use the machine to deliver supplies to the watermen so he can ask them to irrigate their land. He notes that it will be his gift to Mary's unborn child if the watermen agree to send water to them. Jerome agrees upon learning that Mary is pregnant. He tells Fleming to avoid drinking with the watermen when he meets them. That night, Fleming delivers alcohol to Caleb, and while having a drink, Fleming reminds Caleb of his fight with Ernest the night before he died. He then shows him the knife that Ernest took from him, and claims that his kids were confused when they found it among Ernest's effects. Caleb realizes that Fleming threatens to accuse him of murder, so he asks Fleming what he wants. When Fleming asks him to irrigate Ernest's land, Caleb tells him that he'll see what he can do. Soon after, the watermen install pipes that run through Ernest's farm. Fleming uses the robot to till the soil to prepare for planting crops, and when the crops start to grow, Fleming is amazed to see something growing out of the land again. Jerome is sad that his father isn't there to see it, but he thinks that Ernest will be pleased with Fleming for what he did. That same day, Fleming and Mary get married. After the ceremony, Fleming recalls the day that the robot dragged Ernest all over the mountain. One day, Sam stops by the farm with two men who seem interested in buying the land. Fleming notes that it's his wife's land, but Sam reveals that the bank now owns it. It's been in foreclosure for years, but the bank allowed Ernest to stay since nobody wanted to buy it. Sam says people might be interested in buying the farm now that they have water. After discovering how much Ernest owes the bank, Fleming loads the robot into the truck and meets with Suze and Robbie. He then tells Robbie that he found someone who can tell them how much their baby is worth. Afterward, Fleming meets with a young woman who pays him money for the baby even though Robbie hasn't decided on selling the child yet. When Robbie sees a man taking the baby from the robot, he starts getting hysterical, so the woman shoots him. Fleming flees and leaves the robot behind when the woman and her friends start firing at him. Robbie then calls out to Fleming as he bleeds to death, but Fleming is long gone. The next day, Fleming tells Mary that the bank will never kick them out of the farm. When Jerome asks about the robot, Fleming claims that he sold it to Robbie. Meanwhile, the limping robot makes its way to its manufacturer in the city. The shop's owner, Calvin Hoyman, sees Ernest's name and radio frequency on the robot, so he tries to contact him. When Jerome responds, Calvin reveals that the robot's default settings sent it back to his shop. When Jerome looks for Fleming at the auction house, he notices Suze holding a baby doll. Fleming asks Suze about the doll, so she reveals that Robbie instructed her to pretend that she's nursing their baby until he gets back. Jerome tries to talk to Fleming about the robot, but Fleming rushes out of the auction house with Suze. Jerome decides to go to the border to cross the state line and get the robot. However, a guard won't let him cross because he's a minor without a guardian. As he turns back, a girl tells him that she can get him across for a price. When she turns her head, Jerome sees her ear poking out of her hair. After putting Jerome inside a truck, the girl asks him for $200 for a round trip and another $50 for a cell phone. Not long after, Jerome calls the girl on the cell phone to see if it works, and before hanging up, he asks the girl for her name, so she shares that it's Anna. When they get across, Jerome gets to know Anna and learns that she's part of a settler group fighting to get their land back. Upon reaching Calvin's shop, Jerome pays Anna, but she returns $100 and admits that the round trip was a scam. She reveals that Jerome can just walk across the border and the guards won't stop him when he returns. Jerome asks Anna if she's met someone named Ernest, but she can't remember. After parting ways with Anna, Jerome sketches Anna from memory while waiting for the shop to open. In the morning, Calvin arrives and takes Jerome to the robot. While Jerome inspects it, Calvin reveals that the robot's laser sensors record images of its surroundings to help technicians find out how it broke down. As Jerome scans the recording, he is shocked to find out that Fleming attacked his father and tied him to the robot. The machine dragged Ernest all over the mountain after Fleming configured it to go to the deep well. When Jerome returns home, he tells Fleming that the robot returned home, but he pretends not to know anything about it. While trying to shoot deer wandering around the farm, Fleming learns that Ernest's shotgun doesn't shoot straight. Jerome takes the firearm and aims it at Fleming while he's not looking, but he shoots a deer instead. Jerome agrees that there's something wrong with the gun, so he tells Fleming that he's taking it to town to get fixed. And later that day, Jerome wraps the gun in a blanket and hides it under his bed. While having dinner with Fleming and Mary that night, Jerome claims that Robbie contacted them on the radio to look for Fleming. However, Fleming gets exasperated and accuses Jerome of lying because Robbie doesn't have a radio. The next day, Fleming receives a letter purportedly written by Robbie. In the letter, Robbie notes that he couldn't contact Fleming through the radio. He asks Fleming to meet him in the mountain and instructs him to bring food and alcohol because he's in trouble. Fleming looks for Ernest's gun that night, but Jerome claims that he brought it to the shop. Since he doesn't have a firearm, Fleming decides to take a knife before going to the mountain. He soon heads to the meeting place with the robot following him, and upon his arrival, Fleming calls out to Robbie, but no one responds. As he wanders around, Fleming falls into a pit and breaks his leg. When he sees someone approaching, he assumes that the figure is Robbie, so he starts apologizing. After realizing that the figure by the pit is Jerome, he asks for help, but Jerome just stares at him while holding a rock. Soon, Fleming realizes that Jerome discovered what he did to Ernest, so he claims that it was an accident. Jerome disappears for a while, but he soon returns with Ernest's gun. Fleming desperately screams for help, but no one else could hear but Jerome. He asks Jerome what he plans on telling Mary, so Jerome explains that he won't tell her anything, not even about Ernest's death. Fleming warns Jerome that Mary will hate him and the baby if he kills him. When Jerome points a gun at him, Fleming pleads with him one last time by telling him that he's a good person. But Jerome pulls the trigger and shoots him in the head. When Jerome gets home later, Mary is disappointed by Fleming's absence, telling Jerome not to grow into a man. 2 days later, Mary starts to worry about Fleming, but Jerome tells her to wait a little while longer before doing anything. Mary notices that Jerome is tired from his trip from the nursing home, so she advises him to rest. She then notes that they could take Catherine home because they can now afford to install brace wires around the house. However, she realizes that Fleming wouldn't like the idea, so she tells Jerome to forget what she just said. When Mary asks Jerome to guess the gender of the baby in her womb, Jerome tells her that it would be a girl because he knows that's what Mary wants. And the next day, Jerome deletes everything stored in the robot's hard drive.
Subscribe to watch more videos like this. Turn on notifications. And leave a like, it really helps the channel out. Thank you for watching.